The Galactic Council chamber had witnessed wars, plagues, rebellions, and even the birth and death of stars, but never in its entire recorded history had it known a silence as heavy, as suffocating, as terrifying as the silence that fell the moment the distress call from the Vuren front came in. A call not from soldiers begging for reinforcements, not from commanders reporting casualties, not from civilians pleading for mercy, but from the Council's own battlefield monitoring AI, a machine that had no fear, no panic, no emotion. Yet its synthetic voice cracked with something dangerously close to dread as it transmitted a single warning that made every Empire present stop breathing. Human silence detected. For a moment, no one understood. The chamber full of ambassadors, generals, and representatives glanced at each other in confusion. But as the warning repeated, a wave of pure instinctive terror washed through the Council like cold water pouring down spines because every species, no matter how young or ancient, had heard the stories, the legends, the forbidden files hidden in deep archives, the stories of what happens when humans go quiet in battle, stories so disturbing that most empires banned them from military training to prevent soldiers from breaking under fear. Humans were known across the galaxy for their noise, their constant talking, their reckless humor, their bizarre habit of laughing in the middle of firefights, their unshakable instinct to yell warnings, shout encouragements, or throw insults at enemies even while bleeding out. Hundreds of centuries of combat logs agreed on one thing. As long as humans were talking, yelling, cursing, or joking, they were still fighting like normal warriors. But silence, true silence, was different. Silence meant humans had crossed a line inside themselves. Silence meant instinct had taken over. Silence meant they were no longer reacting. They were hunting. In the chamber, Elder Vosk of the Karth Dominion whispered in horror, "It's happening again." And several nearby councillors flinched because the word again implied history, and history meant the ancient stories were true. General Marek of the SYTH coalition demanded, "Show the full transmission." But the AI responded with crackling static before finally stabilizing the visual feed from Vuren front, revealing a battlefield drenched in smoke, fire, and metallic ruins, thousands of soldiers scattered like broken toys, ships burning in the air, mechs collapsing under missile barrages, and through the chaos the sound of gunfire, energy blasts, and alien screams echoed like the cries of a dying planet, until suddenly, all the noise vanished. The Council watched in horrified fascination as the audio dropped to absolute zero. Not static, not muffling, not interference. Pure silence. The AI spoke again, now in an emotionless monotone that somehow felt even more afraid. 3 human soldiers, call signs Kestrel, Orion, and Vale, ceased vocal activity at 3:12. Heartbeat audio lost at 3 hours 12 minutes and 5 seconds. Breathing audio lost at 3 hours 12 minutes and 6 seconds. Combat speech patterns terminated. The Council chamber froze. Entire species known for their bravery began shaking. Empress Serere of the Luminari covered her mouth, trembling violently. "Not this, not the quiet state," she whispered. The quiet state, the phenomenon every military academy feared, the reason the Council created a special alert code no other species ever earned, a code reserved for humans alone. Because humans had a switch inside them, a threshold the galaxy didn't understand. When pushed to it, humans would stop shouting, stop panicking, stop expressing emotion altogether. They would simply turn off the noise. And when the noise turned off, something else turned on. The AI zoomed in on the battlefield camera. 3 human soldiers crouched behind a fallen dropship minutes earlier had vanished from view, but the nearby Vuren troops, massive insectoid warriors with armored exoskeletons, began retreating in visible panic despite holding superior numbers and firepower, their mandibles clicking rapidly in communication as they screamed warnings the Council translators struggled to interpret. "They are quiet." The humans went quiet. "Fall back. Fall back now before they—" The transmission cut out as a shadow flickered behind the Vuren commander. Not a sound. Not a breath. Not a word. Just a blur of human movement, too fast for sensors, too silent for audio to identify. Delegates gasped. The AI continued, human silence level 3 detected. Predicting catastrophic battlefield shift. Chancellor Murok slammed his claws onto the table. How many quiet level events have been recorded in galactic history? The AI hesitated, a rare, terrifying thing for a machine, before responding, 6. A whisper spread across the chamber. Only 6? Only 6 times in 10,000 years had humans gone fully silent in combat. But the Council knew the terrifying truth. Every one of those 6 events had resulted in total enemy collapse within minutes. Not victory. Not dominance. Collapse. Armies fleeing in terror. Generals abandoning posts. Entire species submitting unconditionally after a single silent human assault. General Marek swallowed hard. Bring up the ancient combat archive. The chamber dimmed as forbidden files unlocked. Grainy footage from wars the galaxy tried to forget. In one recording, a small team of humans fell silent during a siege. Their allies panicked. Their enemies cheered. But then the humans stepped out of cover and moved through enemy lines without a sound, dodging lasers, cutting down armor, disabling mechs with their bare hands, moving with such cold efficiency that even war machines designed to mimic human tactics fell apart in confusion. Another file showed a lone human soldier standing silent on a ridge as thousands of enemies charged him. Yet not a single enemy made it within 10 meters. The footage ended abruptly, but the result had been clear: total enemy surrender. Elder Vosk whispered, "Why do they do it? How do they do it?" The AI answered, glowing red, "Analysis. Human silence represents psychological shift. Emotions suppressed. Instinct elevated. Combat efficiency increases by 400%. Pain response decreases. Fear becomes non-existent. Objective becomes singular." "And that objective is?" the Chancellor asked. The AI responded with a chilling simplicity: "End threat." The chamber erupted with chaos. Some species demanded retreating from the Vuran front entirely. Others called for banning humans from the battlefield. Others cried out that the humans should have never been allowed to fight alongside alien armies because once they entered the quiet state, even allies could become collateral damage, not out of malice, but because humans in silence saw the entire battlefield as a puzzle to be solved, and they solved it with brutal precision. Meanwhile, the battlefield feed continued to play. The Council watched Vuran soldiers look around frantically, their antennae twitching in terror. Where are they? What direction? What sound? Why can't we hear them? And then the worst part occurred. The comms picked up. The battlefield of Vuran lay under a choking haze of smoke and burning metal as alien screams echoed across crushed terrain. But everything changed the moment the 3 human soldiers, Kestrel, Orion, and Vale, fell completely silent, because the chaos around them did not simply fade, it reacted as if the universe itself recognized a shift in nature. A shift so primal that even automated drones hesitated in midair as if reconsidering their orders, and the Vuran enemy troops, once confident in their overwhelming numbers, suddenly froze mid-charge as their instincts screamed warnings older than language, their insectoid limbs trembling uncontrollably, mandibles clicking in patterns of terror passed down genetically from ancestors who once survived humanity's early battles. The silence was not absence of sound, it was presence of something else. An invisible pressure that settled over the battlefield like a cold hand pressing against every soldier's spine, and even the human allies. Fighting nearby felt it, their hearts stumbling in their chests, their bodies shivering without knowing why. Because humans recognized the quiet state not with their minds but with their bones, as if their DNA whispered, "One of us has crossed the line. Stay out of their way." Far above the battlefield, military drones sent by the Council recorded every second, but their cameras kept glitching whenever a silent human moved, as though the humans slipped between frames, appearing inches from where they were supposed to be, moving with a speed that wasn't speed at all but efficiency so absolute it became terrifying. Kestrel appeared behind a Vuran heavy trooper without making a single sound, her movements fluid, her expression blank, her footsteps so controlled that not even ground sensors detected pressure, and with one precise motion she disabled the trooper's weapon, severed his armor vents, and silenced him before he even realized she was there. At the same time, Orion slid beneath an artillery walker, avoiding its stomping feet with impossible calm, his breathing non-existent, his eyes steady as a sniper locked on destiny, and with a single upward strike he severed the walker's power spine, dropping the massive machine like a puppet whose strings had been cut, the explosion lighting his silent silhouette like a ghost born from fire. Vale, the youngest of the three, moved through Vuran infantry like a shadow weaving through tall grass, his hands striking pressure points with surgical precision, shutting down nervous systems and disrupting armored joints, leaving enemies alive but unconscious, because humans in the quiet state did not waste energy on unnecessary kills. They simply removed obstacles between them and the objective. Across the battlefield, terrified Vuran commanders screamed into their comms, begging their soldiers to regroup, to form perimeter lines, to fire blindly into smoke. But no soldier obeyed, not out of disloyalty but because their bodies would no longer move toward the silent humans, their instincts overriding training as pure primal fear took control. Ancient memories buried deep in evolutionary history screamed warnings their ancestors had carved into their species' survival code. Do not approach the quiet human. Do not look at the quiet human. Do not provoke the quiet human. On the council station orbiting the battlefield, analysts stared at their screens in horror as heart rate monitors for the humans displayed impossible data. Heartbeats slowed to barely above death, brain activity spiking into patterns no AI could decode, pain responses dropping to zero, emotional centers going dark, motor control centers lighting up like supernovas, turning each human into something more machine than flesh, more predator than soldier, a biological weapon of pure instinct honed through millions of years of evolution and countless generations of conflict. Generals and ambassadors watched in silence, true silence, the kind that comes when fear is too large for words, as Orion leapt across a burning trench, dodging a plasma bolt that should have vaporized him, landing with the smooth precision of a creature that had stopped fearing death. Kestrel intercepted a missile mid-flight, redirecting it with her bare hands using momentum and angle rather than brute strength, sending it spinning back into the Vuran artillery nest. Veil scaled a collapsing mech as if gravity itself had surrendered, planting a demolition charge in its neck before vanishing into smoke without a sound. The battlefield's audio logs showed only two things: explosions from Vuran weapons and human silence. Even the wounded humans, those bleeding from plasma cuts or shrapnel, made no cries of pain, no gasps, no groans. They simply continued moving, eyes locked ahead, voices buried under the weight of the quiet state. The Vuran army finally broke. Troops fled in every direction, dropping weapons, abandoning vehicles, some crawling away while sobbing in their own language. Make them talk again. Please make them talk again, because every species in the galaxy understood the terrible truth. Humans who talk can be reasoned with, but humans who go silent cannot be stopped. On the council screens, red warnings flashed: quiet level 4 approaching. Battlefield collapse imminent. It was the highest warning before planetary evacuation. Chancellor Murok grabbed the edge of his seat, claws digging into the metal, as he whispered, "End the alert, please end the silence." But the battlefield only grew quieter, until even the sound of flames seemed to mute itself in respect or fear. Drones hovering above detected a shift in air pressure as Kestrel, Orion, and Veil regrouped at the center of the battlefield, their movements perfectly synchronized, their breathing still absent, their presence radiating an invisible force that bent the morale of every living creature around them. The AI monitoring the battlefield recorded one final entry for the Council: human silence spreading. Unknown trigger. Unknown endpoint. Enemy morale collapsing. Recommend immediate withdrawal of all non-human forces. But it was already too late. The Vuran army had shattered, the remaining troops running without direction, some fleeing off cliffs, others dropping their weapons and kneeling in the mud, hands raised toward the sky as if praying to ancient gods to save them from the quiet humans. And as the last pockets of Vuran resistance fell apart, the battlefield returned to stillness. The only movement, the three silent humans standing back-to-back in a triangle formation, their eyes scanning the horizon, with the cold precision of apex predators ensuring the hunt was complete. Then, and only then, did a single sound return to the battlefield. A human heartbeat. The moment that faint human heartbeat echoed through the ruined landscape of Vuran 4, every soldier on the field, friend or foe, felt a shiver crawl through their bones because the heartbeat did not sound like the return of a normal soldier. It sounded like the slow, measured pulse of something ancient reborn, something that had crawled out of instinctual memory and stepped directly into the present. And the battlefield reacted instantly as drones buckled midair, sensors glitched, and alien. Troops dropped to their knees clutching their chests as if the sound itself reached inside their lungs, squeezing, warning, reminding them of a truth their ancestors once knew well. A quiet human is not a survivor. A quiet human is an executioner, and now that heartbeat, steady, cold, unhurried, was the drums of a hunt beginning. Back on the council station, the monitoring room fell into horrified silence as the heartbeat synced with the combat logs, illuminating all screens with a chilling pattern labeled Quiet State, Prime Mode. Something the council had believed only existed in ancient Terran myths but was now unfolding live before their eyes. An analyst scrambled to decode it while veterans from older wars backed away from the screens in pure terror, whispering, "Not again, not again. The quiet prime, the one thing even the ancients could not map." But their voices trembled because no one truly understood what triggered this mode. Only that when humans fell into it, they fought with a precision that defied natural limits. On the battlefield, Kestrel, Orion, and Vale remained motionless in their triangle formation, the smoke swirling around them like ghosts gathering for a ritual, and though they didn't speak, something in the air changed. The pressure grew heavier, the light dimmer, the ground itself seeming to tense beneath their boots as if the planet, too, feared what was coming. The remaining Vuran troops who had not yet fled felt the atmosphere thicken like a living thing pressing against their exoskeletons, suffocating their instincts, making their limbs shake uncontrollably, and their commander, the last high-ranking officer left alive, grabbed his communicator with trembling claws, screaming, "All forces, retreat, retreat. They have entered the quiet heart. We cannot." But before he could finish, Orion appeared inches behind him, emerging from the smoke like a phantom stepping out of the nightmares of a dying species. And with a silent, graceful motion he disabled the commander's armor, removed his weapon, and placed him unconscious on the ground without shedding a drop of blood. The council chamber erupted in stunned gasps, because Orion's action wasn't mercy, it was focus, and that made it far more terrifying, for humans in the quiet state do not kill unnecessarily. They eliminate obstacles with the efficiency of nature's most perfected predators. As the last commander's body hit the dirt, Vale moved his gaze across the battlefield with inhuman calm, scanning every heat signature, every heartbeat, every vibration in the ground, mapping the entire field in less than a second. And when his eyes locked onto a pocket of Vuran soldiers hiding behind a fallen Capital Walker, the drones captured something horrifying. Vale's pupils contracted into razor-thin predator slits, his heart rate dropping even further into a state so cold that medical AI labeled it non-combat functional. Yet this was when humans were most lethal. He vanished into the smoke. No sound. No ripple. No warning. A split second later, the hiding Vurans saw a blur of movement. Then their weapons were dismantled, their armor severed, their limbs frozen from precise nerve strikes, and as they collapsed one by one, not a single human word was spoken. The Council's AI recorded frantic warnings, human tactical patterns unreadable, movement beyond predictive models, instinct-driven combat logic, threat level escalating. Meanwhile, Kestrel advanced toward the enemy's final stronghold, a fortified bunker protected by 10 layers of energy shields. Yet she did not fire a weapon, she did not call for support, she simply walked toward it at a slow, steady pace, and the shield barriers, designed to withstand plasma bombardment, flickered the moment she entered their radius, reacting as though sensing her presence, destabilizing themselves as if refusing to stand between her and her objective. Vuran technicians inside the bunker panicked, slamming their claws against consoles, screaming, "The shields are failing." They're reacting to her, and in their terror they made the worst mistake. They opened fire. A barrage of plasma storms, enough to burn through steel mountains, shot toward Kestrel. But she stepped sideways with the calm grace of a dancer shifting rhythm, each blast missing her by inches, not because she dodged them, but because she knew where they were going before they fired, her body predicting movement before sensors could record it, her instincts sharpening into something beyond logic. She reached the bunker door, placed her hand on it, and the shield grid collapsed instantly, the metal door folding inward like wet clay. Not melted, not broken, just defeated. The Council broke into chaos, some demanding evacuation from the planet, others demanding immediate surrender to humanity, others insisting the humans must be contained before they escalated further. But a few, the oldest among them, simply watched in silence, knowing there was no containing a human in the quiet prime. The only way to stop them was to let them finish what triggered them in the first place. The feed returned to the battlefield as Orion and Vale regrouped with Kestrel in front of the destroyed bunker. The three silent humans standing shoulder to shoulder, their eyes scanning for the next threat, their bodies perfectly still, their breathing absent from all audio logs. Then, the AI monitoring everything registered something unexpected. The humans are searching. Not for enemies. For survivors. And that was when the council chamber fell into total silence, because the quiet state wasn't about killing. It was about purpose, and whatever purpose had driven these humans into silence was not yet fulfilled. The battlefield shook. The smoke parted. Something deeper in the ruins began to move. The ruins beneath the shattered bunker groaned like a wounded beast as Kestrel, Orion, and Vale stepped deeper into the crumbling structure, their silhouettes dissolving into the dark without a single sound, and sensors from the council's drones scrambled to keep up with their movement, glitching every few seconds as if refusing to show what lay beyond the smoke. While above ground, the remaining Vuran soldiers continued retreating in blind terror, tripping over debris, abandoning weapons, some even tearing off their own armor as though needing to shed anything that reminded them they were part of a battlefield where silent humans walked. Yet none of them dared flee toward the bunker because every instinct they possessed screamed that whatever the humans were going toward was far worse than anything outside. Inside the ruined structure, the temperature dropped sharply, frost forming along broken metal walls, lights flickering weakly as if struggling to stay alive, and the deeper the soldiers moved, the heavier the silence became. Like the entire bunker was suffocating under the weight of something unsaid, something broken, something hidden, and as the council's audio feed streamed back, analysts leaned forward in dread because they heard something faint, something beneath the silence, something that didn't belong to the humans. A sob, a small, shaking sob, a child's sob. And suddenly everything made sense. The trigger. The reason for the quiet state. The reason the humans went still as death. The AI monitoring the feed zoomed in on the deepest section of the bunker, room S7, where a group of terrified alien children huddled behind a collapsed column, their tiny faces streaked with dirt and soot, their clothes torn, their bodies trembling violently as the Vuran soldiers guarding them lay dead nearby, killed not by humans, but by their own collapsing structure when the battle began. And now the children, barely alive, cried softly in the dark, too weak to scream, too afraid to move. The council chamber erupted in gasps, some in horror, some in shame, as the AI whispered the truth. The humans went quiet. To protect the children. Suddenly, everything the galaxy feared made perfect sense. Humans didn't go silent to kill. They went silent when something inside them broke. When their hearts locked onto a single purpose. When they saw something so cruel, so unacceptable, that their instincts overtook their emotions, sharpening them into weapons honed not by rage but by duty. In the bunker, Kestrel reached the children first, moving through the debris like a ghost, her face void of emotion but her hands impossibly gentle as she knelt and brushed dust off the nearest child's cheek. Her silence no longer the silence of a predator but the silence of a guardian seeing the wounded for the first time. Orion scanned the chamber for threats, his movements still calculated and deadly. But now his eyes softened when he saw a little one struggling to breathe, and Vale, usually the most energetic, lowered his head slightly when he saw a child clutching a broken toy, the symbol of a life torn apart by war. The children looked up, expecting monsters, but instead found three silent humans staring back at them with expressions that were not cold, just controlled, powerful, steady. The smallest child reached toward Kestrel with shaking fingers. The human warrior, still in the quiet state, extended her hand instinctively, gently lifting the child into her arms, and the moment that tiny hand touched her chest armor, something shifted in the air. Her heartbeat returned, faint but audible, the signal of a human reawakening from the quiet mind. The council's audio feed registered it, heartbeat detected, Kestrel. A second heartbeat followed, Orion's. Then a third, Vale's. And just like that, the deadly silence began to crack, replaced by something softer, something almost sacred. The AI recorded, quiet state dissipating, stabilization occurring. Outside, on the battlefield, every Vuran soldier who hadn't fled suddenly felt the paralyzing dread begin to fade, replaced by confusion as the oppressive silence lifted, replaced by the faintest sound of human breathing echoing from the ruins. Inside the council chamber, the tension broke as some delegates collapsed in relief and others wept openly, But a few, especially those who had once fought alongside humans, closed their eyes and whispered. They didn't go silent to kill. They went silent because children were in danger. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt shame. In the bunker, the children clung to the silent humans, their cries soft but growing steadier, and Vale whispered his first word since entering the quiet state. So quietly that only the drones caught it, safe. Kestrel nodded once. Orion exhaled. The quiet state ended. And the Council finally understood the ancient warning that had terrified empires for generations. When a human goes quiet, something innocent is at risk. Suddenly, protecting those children was not just a mission. It was the reason humans became silent. The reason the galaxy feared that silence more than war itself. And as the humans lifted the children into their arms and began carrying them out of the bunker, the truth hit the Council like a tidal wave. The alert wasn't created to warn the galaxy of human rage. It was created to warn them of human purpose. The most terrifying sound in the universe wasn't human silence. It was the reason behind it as Kestrel, Orion, and Vale carried the alien children out of the bunker. The entire battlefield paused, as though the war itself held its breath in confusion and awe, because the sight of three silent humans, figures the galaxy feared as unstoppable predators, walking slowly through smoke with wounded children in their arms was something no soldier, no drone, no general could have imagined, and the Vuren. Troops who had been running moments ago now collapsed to their knees, not from fear, but from guilt, their trembling mandibles clicking weak apologies as they watched the humans cradle the young with unimaginable gentleness, each step steady, each movement careful, as if the world around them might break if they walked too fast. Above, Council drones zoomed in frantically, their sensors struggling to reconcile the data. Three humans who moments ago dismantled an entire army without speaking were now whispering soft reassurances to injured children, their voices so low only the drones could hear. Words like "it's okay, you're safe now, breathe." And those words, so fragile and human, rippled across the battlefield with more power than any weapon fired that day. Orion stopped briefly to adjust the blanket around the smallest child, his hands, still stained with battle soot, moving with such tenderness that Vuren soldiers watching broke into tears, realizing the humans they feared were not monsters. They were protectors pushed to a place no one should ever have to reach. Kestrel, normally silent even in normal combat, bent her head slightly so a frightened child could tuck their face into her neck, and the warmth of that small gesture caused Council analytics officers to stare at their screens in stunned silence, witnessing not Death Welders, but guardians shaped by unimaginable responsibility. Vale, usually the most energetic of the trio, moved with slow, deliberate care, holding two children against his chest. Murmuring soft rhythmic breaths so they would match his pace and calm their shaking, and each time a child whimpered, he tightened his hold just enough to make them feel safe but not enough to frighten them. An instinct so precise it shocked even the AI assigned to decode human combat behavior. From orbit, the Council chamber erupted into heated discussion, some insisting the humans must be celebrated, others arguing that if such compassion existed alongside such deadly instinct, it made humans even more unpredictable, more dangerous, because a species capable of annihilating armies and comforting children in the same breath defied every model of warfare the galaxy had ever known. Yet the oldest Council member, Elder Rethoy, simply stood up with trembling hands and whispered, "We judged them wrong, we feared them wrong," and as his voice filled the chamber, the feed from the battlefield showed Vuren soldiers dropping their weapons voluntarily, raising their empty hands in surrender not out of fear of death, but from shame for what their army had done to innocents. The battlefield, once filled with screams and fire, now echoed with a different sound. Quiet sobs, Vuren voices whispering apologies to the universe, acknowledging their failure to protect their own young, while the humans did not hesitate for a second. Then, something extraordinary happened. The surviving Vuren soldiers, one by one, began standing in a line, not to block the humans, not to fight, but to form a protective corridor leading toward the extraction point. Their bodies forming living walls so no stray shot, no unstable structure, no hidden threat could harm the children now protected by these silent humans, and when Kestrel glanced at them, even for a moment, something shifted inside every Vuren heart. They saw not a weapon, not a monster, but a warrior who fought only because someone small, someone innocent, needed saving. As the humans reached the evacuation field, the Council's medical teams, who had been too afraid to approach earlier, slowly stepped forward, shaking, unsure whether they would be allowed near the children. But the humans simply nodded once, silently granting permission, their eyes steady, their bodies finally relaxing from the cold, controlled tension of the quiet state. The children were lifted gently from their arms, and for the first time since the humans went silent, the battlefield exhaled. Vale, exhausted beyond measure, leaned against a broken shuttle wing, closing his eyes briefly as if fighting back tears he would never show. Orion cracked his knuckles, a sign his body was returning to normal, his heartbeat steadying. Kestrel wiped soot off her armor with trembling fingers, staring quietly at the rescued young, a softness in her eyes that no enemy had ever seen. But peace did not last long, because the Council's AI detected something deeper in the bunker. Something the humans had sensed even before the machines did. And suddenly the humans' faces changed, not into fear, not into anger, but into that terrifying, focused stillness that signaled they were about to re-enter the quiet state. Because hidden below the rubble, beneath the children's shelter, beneath the collapsed corridor, were more heat signatures, smaller ones, weaker ones, fading. There were more children, still trapped, still alive, still waiting. And the humans did not hesitate. Without a word, without a breath, without asking permission, they turned around and sprinted back toward the ruins of the bunker. Their footsteps silent once again, their purpose sharpening like blades reborn in fire. The battlefield trembled. The council screens dimmed. Every soldier felt their heart sink into their stomach. The humans were going quiet again, and this time, they were running the moment Kestrel, Orion, and Vale turned back toward the broken bunker. The entire battlefield froze in disbelief, because every alien soldier, ally or enemy, had assumed the humans were finished, that the quiet state was over, that the storm had passed, yet the second their boots hit the ground and they sprinted toward the ruins with absolute silence, the pressure around them shifted again, air tightening, dust rising, senses cracking under the weight of a purpose so sharp it tore through every model of human behavior the council thought they understood. And soldiers felt their bones vibrate as if reality itself recognized that humans had detected something more fragile, more endangered, more heartbreaking than anything yet seen. Trapped survivors, children who hadn't been rescued, whose faint life signals flickered like dying stars deep under steel and stone. The Vuran soldiers who had formed a protective corridor earlier now watched in stunned awe, their mandibles trembling as they realized the humans weren't charging back into danger for revenge or battle. They were going because innocent lives still needed saving, and nothing, not rubble, not fire, not death, could stop a quiet human whose purpose was protection. Orion reached the ruins first, his hands tearing aside molten metal slabs that 3 Vuran warriors together couldn't move, veins tightening under his skin with sheer control, not rage, as he tossed the debris behind him like it weighed nothing, each motion surgical, efficient, powered by a force deeper than any weapon. He wasn't fighting an enemy, he was fighting time. Vale slid into the collapsed corridor like a ghost slipping through shadows, his fingers moving across cracked stones, broken pipes, and burning wires without hesitation, reading vibrations through his palms like a predator tracking heartbeats in the dark, whispering, "Left, 2 meters, someone's breathing." And Kestrel followed him, her movements precise as she stabilized crumbling beams with her bare hands, holding up several tons of collapsing structure, her muscles trembling under the pressure but her expression unchanging, completely silent, completely focused, completely unbreakable. Council drones tried to map the space, but every scan failed, interference rising the closer they got to the humans, like the bunker itself resisted revealing the moment of truth. Yet the audio captured something faint. A weak cough, followed by a whimper, followed by the tiniest cry. More children, trapped deeper, barely alive. And that single sound ignited the human's quiet state into something even more terrifying. Quiet state. Hardcore, a level no alien had ever witnessed. A level even the Council's oldest soldiers had only heard about in legends. Oxygen thinned as Orion dug deeper, the air burning with dust and plasma residue, every breath a struggle. But humans in the quiet state did not breathe for themselves. They breathed for the ones they had to save. Vale found the first gap leading to the survivors and slipped into it, scraping his arms on jagged metal without flinching, crawling through a tunnel barely wider than his shoulders. Sparks burning against his skin, blood dripping silently to the floor as he pushed on without a word. because pain meant nothing when someone small needed him. Kestrel's arms shook violently as she held up the ceiling to stop it from collapsing onto the boys, and every alien watching felt tears sting their eyes because they'd always been taught that humans were dangerous because they were brutal predators. But in that moment they understood humans were dangerous because they refused to abandon the helpless, even when it meant crushing themselves to dust. Then Vale reached them. 3 alien children curled together under a twisted steel beam, their breaths shallow, their bodies bruised, their eyes half open in hopelessness, expecting monsters, expecting death, until Vale reached out through the dust and said, in a voice soft as light, "Hey, I got you." The children sobbed the moment they heard a human voice, a sound Kestrel and Orion heard instantly, their bodies tightening, their hearts beating harder, and the shift rippled through the bunker like a shockwave as the humans reawakened further, their instincts rising from guardians into lifelines. Vale carefully lifted the beam enough to slide one child into his arm, then another, then a third, each movement powered by quiet desperation, and Kestrel's knees buckled under the weight of the ceiling, dust raining down her neck, yet she held firm, her breath silent, her body refusing to collapse because she could hear the children's cries, and no human trained to protect could ever let those cries go unanswered. Orion crawled deeper, helping Vale maneuver the children toward the exit, shielding their faces from sparks, using his body as a barrier whenever metal shifted dangerously close, whispering short commands not out of dominance but out of safety. "Keep your eyes closed, stay low, don't let go." And the bunker trembled with every movement, steel screaming, stone cracking, alarms wailing, ceiling ready to fall in a single deadly breath. Outside, soldiers watched from a distance, holding their own breath, praying to gods they didn't believe in that these humans, these unstoppable, terrifying, beautiful creatures, would survive their own mission. And then it happened. The ceiling gave way. A thunderous crack tore through the bunker. Rubble surged downward like a collapsing mountain, dust exploding outward in a choking cloud, alarms cutting to static, and for 3 horrifying seconds, the world lost sight of the humans completely. The council chamber erupted in screams. Vuran soldiers roared in mourning. Even the AI stuttered. Then, out of the dust, Orion appeared first, limping, armor shattered, carrying 2 children in his arms, breathing hard but silent. Vale stumbled out behind him, coughing, blood dripping from his forehead, holding the last child to his chest as if the universe depended on that tiny life. And Kestrel emerged last, collapsing to her knees the moment the children were safe, her body finally giving in as she released a shuddering breath, dust shaking off her shoulders like broken wings. Not a single human spoke. Not a single alien moved. And then something extraordinary happened. Every Vuran soldier, every council officer, every commander watching from orbit dropped to one knee. Not in fear, not in submission, but in respect. For the first time in galactic history, the universe bowed to humans not because of their power, but because of their heart. The children lived. The humans survived. And the battlefield, once a place of death, became a place of truth as Kestrel knelt in the dust with her arms trembling and Orion and Vale stood beside her, battered but still holding the rescued children close. The entire battlefield shifted from chaos to reverent silence, a silence no longer born from fear but from awe, because every alien present realized they had witnessed something their ancestors never told them. Humans did not become terrifying when they went quiet because they loved violence. They became terrifying because they loved life, because the second they sensed innocent lives in danger, every instinct sharpened, every emotion froze, every fear died, and they transformed into creatures of purpose so pure the universe itself bowed to it. And as Vuran soldiers stared at the humans, their mandibles trembling, tears rolling down their armored cheeks, a thought echoed through their collective minds: we feared the wrong things. One by one, without anyone giving an order, Vuran soldiers placed their weapons on the ground, not as surrender to defeat but as surrender to truth. The truth that humans had saved their young when their own army failed, that humans bled under collapsing stone to protect children who weren't even their species, that humans carried pain in silence so the innocent wouldn't feel it. A Vuran commander limped forward, armor cracked, vision blurred, and knelt before the humans, lowering his head in a gesture of absolute respect, whispering, "Forgive us, we did not know your hearts." And the soft tremor in his voice spread through every soldier behind him until an entire army, tens of thousands strong, dropped to their knees around the humans and the saved children, forming a circle of honor that stretched across the battlefield like a living shield. Meanwhile, high above the planet, the Galactic Council chamber stood frozen in disbelief as the live feed showed a sight no one in recorded history had ever seen. Humans, covered in dust and blood, surrounded not by enemies but by protectors, by soldiers of another species standing guard so the rescuers could finally rest, and ambassadors who once argued that humans were too dangerous to trust now wiped tears from their eyes. Some ashamed for centuries of prejudice, some humbled by how wrong they had been, and the oldest among them, Elder Rethoi, stepped forward to the center of the chamber, his voice shaking as he said, "We feared their silence, but their silence was never a threat to us. It was a promise to the innocent." Those words echoed through the hall like a thunderclap, and across dozens of connected star systems, commanders, generals, diplomats, and civilians watched the footage in absolute stunned reverence. Humans carrying alien children through fire, through collapsing metal, through death, refusing to stop until every heartbeat was safe. Back on Vuren 4, medics finally approached, moving slowly, respectfully, afraid to break the sacred stillness around the humans, and when they knelt to take the children from Orion's arms, his fingers hesitated, not because he didn't trust them, but because his body wasn't ready to let go. It was Kestrel who finally lifted her gaze, dust streaked across her face, eyes cracked open just enough to whisper, "Take them, please." The first full sentence spoken since the quiet state began, and the medics wept openly as they accepted the young survivors, knowing that every life they cradled had been bought with pain humans bore without complaint. Vale, exhausted beyond measure, sank to the ground, leaning back against a burned pillar, eyes closed, letting the first wave of physical agony finally crash through him now that the children were safe. And when a Vuren soldier moved closer to offer him water, Vale opened one eye and nodded silently, accepting it not as tribute but as peace. The battlefield began to transform, Vuren troops forming protective circles around the humans, scouts guarding the perimeter, engineers clearing debris, medics tending to wounded humans before tending to their own commander, and every action carried a message. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. Then, in the distance, engines thundered, council vessels descending from orbit, their ramp lights casting long shadows over the battlefield as elite diplomats and generals stepped out, each of them arriving not to command, not to negotiate, but to witness what history would record as the turning point of relations between humans and the galaxy. The council high marshal approached slowly, his steps deliberate, face pale, posture lowered in respect as he neared Kestrel, Orion, and Vale, and when he stood before them, he removed his armor plate, an ancient sign of vulnerability, and kneeled, a gesture no council officer had given any species in 3,000 years, whispering, "The alert was not created to protect us from humans. It was created to warn us of what we must never force them to become." His words trembled through the entire army, and the children, now wrapped in thermal blankets nearby, reached out tiny hands toward the humans, their voices soft and grateful, and Kestrel, hearing them, felt her breath catch in her throat. The first emotional crack in her warrior calm. As she leaned forward slightly, eyes filled with something neither human nor alien had words for. In that moment, every recording drone zoomed in, capturing the single image that would define the next century. 3 broken, exhausted humans, sitting in the ruins of war, surrounded by an army not bowing in fear but standing in protection around them, while rescued alien children touched their hands with trust strong enough to drown the universe's oldest fears. And as the twin sons of Vuren finally rose through the smoke, their light falling across the battlefield, the galaxy understood a truth older than war itself. When humans go silent, they do not become monsters. They become heroes. The universe is not worthy of us. The twin suns climbed higher over the shattered battlefield of Vuren 4. Their light cutting through the smoke like golden blades, the galaxy watched in breathless silence as Kestrel, Orion, and Vale slowly rose to their feet. Their bodies bruised, armor cracked, exhaustion etched into every line of their faces, yet their eyes steady with the quiet strength of warriors who carried more than their own survival. They carried the lives they saved, the hope they restored, and the truth they revealed, a truth the universe had spent centuries ignoring. Humans were not the monsters the council archives whispered about. They were the shield that stood between innocence and extinction, and the moment that shield sensed danger, it went silent, not to kill without mercy, but to act without hesitation. The Vuren soldiers, now fully respectful, formed a wide protective circle as the humans walked forward, children waving their small hands. reaching out with tiny voices saying thank you, and those simple words, spoken without fear, were more powerful than any weapon fired that day. The Council High Marshal stepped aside as the humans approached, lowering his head again in a gesture of reverence, but Kestrel gently shook her head, silently refusing the bow, a message that needed no words. Respect should be mutual, not worship, and the Marshal understood instantly, lifting his gaze with tears in his ancient eyes, tears shed not for fear but for gratitude. As they reached the landing zone, Orion stopped to help the last injured Vuran medic climb aboard, even though he himself limped heavily on a wounded leg. Vale, still pale and dizzy, used his remaining strength to carry a child's favorite broken toy, a small metal animal, because he couldn't bear the thought of the child losing one more thing, and Kestrel, standing tall despite the pain that threatened to crush her bones, turned back one last time to look at the battlefield that had tried to bury her team, her jaw tightening with the weight of memory, not of regret, but of resolve. The Council's evacuation ships lifted them gently from the ground, engines humming softly out of respect, and as they ascended, the Vuran army below raised their arms high in salute, tens of thousands of soldiers honoring the very species they had once feared more than death, their voices rising in a unified chant unfamiliar yet pure, a phrase that the translators struggled to decode until the AI whispered, "They are calling them guardians." On the Council station, the doors to the Grand Chamber opened with thunderous force as ambassadors, generals, and diplomats from 57 species poured in, demanding to witness the heroes, but when Kestrel, Orion, and Vale stepped off the shuttle, they did not walk like conquerors. They walked like tired protectors who expected nothing in return, and that humility, that quiet strength, shattered centuries of prejudice. Leaders who once rejected humanity rushed forward, not to accuse, but to thank, some dropping to their knees, others bringing gifts, others simply crying in shame for how wrong they had been. Elder Rethoi stepped forward last, leaning heavily on his staff, his ancient eyes trembling as he spoke directly to the humans. "Forgive us, for fearing your silence instead of honoring your courage." And though the humans said nothing, the small nod Kestrel gave him was enough to break him into tears. Suddenly the doors at the end of the chamber swung open as the rescued alien children ran inside, breaking every rule, pushing past guards, shouting the humans' names through laughter and joy, and when they collided with Orion, Vale, and Kestrel in a whirlwind of tiny arms and tears, the entire chamber erupted into emotional chaos. Applause, sobs, cheers, a roar of respect that echoed across the galaxies like a new anthem. That image, 3 humans kneeling as alien children hugged their necks, broadcasted to every world in the Council network, rewriting every story, every warning, every myth ever told about humans, and turning them into something new, hope. Later, when the Council officially abolished the old alert system that labeled human silence as a threat, they replaced it with a new protocol, one written in glowing letters across every Starfleet station. When a human falls silent, prepare for a rescue. That message spread like wildfire, reaching even the darkest corners of space, declaring to every species, friend and foe, that humanity's silence was not the sound of destruction, but the calm before courage. And as the humans finally boarded their ship to return home, Vale leaned against the railing with a tired grin. Orion closed his eyes to feel the warm artificial sunlight, and Kestrel allowed herself the smallest smile as she watched the stars beyond the glass, knowing the universe would never forget what happened on Vuran 4. Because that day, the galaxy learned the truth. Humans don't go quiet to end life, they go quiet to save it. And in that silence, the universe found its greatest protectors.